welcome to this compilation tribute for James Traficant. Traficant explains how Israel pimps America. I appreciate Jim Traficant Jr. for many reasons, including because he exposed government idiocy, effectively articulated and helped actuate reversing IRS abuses. He could stand alone as he lambasted deserving Democrat and Republican colleagues alike. Let's not forget those classic one-minute speeches either, in which he often broached breaching House rules on proper speech while addressing the floor, if that doesn't bust your balsam. Nowadays, I'm most grateful that Representative Traficant, that railroaded Traficant, discussed how the Israel lobby bleeds and bankrupts America. Rest in peace, Mr. James Traficant. You rocked in politics.
Can't have it.
Can't have it. I said, you said you had some grudges. Who are your grudges against?
Well, number one, and my wife constantly reminds me to tone down. I brought that guy back from Israel, John Deminick. It was my Freedom of Information Act which proved not only that he was innocent, but who Ivan really was. The case was so sensitive, members of Congress would say, Jim, I love you, but please, don't involve me. I sent my evidence to the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati. They wouldn't accept it. I finally sent it over to Israel, to the Israeli Supreme Court, and they called me over there, and I went with the family. I did a live interview, satellite, with Brian Gumbel, and I said, when they put this innocent man to death, they're going to lose $15 to $20 billion every year they get from the American taxpayers. And Brian Gumbel says, what are you talking about? They only get $3 billion. And I said, Brian, that's only the foreign aid bill. Look at all the other trade compacts, economic assistance, military assistance. I'm saying this to you right now. Israel gets approximately $15 billion a year from the American taxpayers. That $15 billion is $30,000 for every man, woman, and child. And people in my district are losing their pension benefits. So I was targeted big time.
By the Israelis.
The Israeli Supreme Court looked at the evidence, could not refute it. And it came from the Justice Department, Greta. And they said, take him home. I brought him home, and he was bombarded ever since.
Home to Ohio.
Now he's in Germany fighting for his life. Now let me say this. Prosecutor Moskowitz of the OSI Office of the United States Justice Department suborned perjury with Otto Horn. The documents clearly state who Ivan the Terrible was, a man named Ivan Marchenko, not Deminick. And they had to release him. And now they can't live with it. They couldn't live with Jim Traficant, having beaten him in 1983. I was a walking symbol of defiance. And now they have this man in Germany. And if someone doesn't look into this, the American people should be ashamed of themselves. When you allow one American to be violated, you threaten the freedoms of every American. And I can't understand this, why no one in Congress is raising their voice. And the reason is very simple. And this may be you don't want to hear, I don't know. And I certainly don't want to hurt you on your show. You have one of the best. You're fair. But I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
I don't have to tell anybody they're wrong or right. I was targeted by the Justice Department since 1983, being the only American in history to defeat the Justice Department in a RICO trial pro se without being an attorney, and they couldn't live with that. Finally, I was the number one target in the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And let me tell you something. People are scared to death in Washington to say what's wrong with the country, because if you rile some big people, you're done. They're more concerned with perpetuity than what's good for the country. And the country's going to hell in a handbasket, Chris.
Well, let's talk.
This is a very serious problem.
Look, without getting into the specific charge against AIPAC and the others, when you sit in Congress, I want your perspective on this, because you were in STIR for 7 years, you were in Congress for 9 terms. You've got a neat perspective. Are you saying that members of Congress are basically prostitutes? That they're basically scared to death of the interest groups, scared to death of the people that buy their campaigns? What are you actually saying about the system?
Chris, years ago on the House floor, on a foreign aid debate, I called the members of the House of Representatives a bunch of political prostitutes. They demanded my words be stricken. They jumped up like 100 wounded TV evangelists. So finally I said, okay, I apologize to all those people who were offended, and to those who were not offended, I commended them. But when I went outside, there's this little stringer group, and they said, tell us what you really feel, Jim. And here's what I said, Chris. I said, I want to apologize to all the hookers in America for having associated them with the United States House of Representatives. Yeah, I think it's a big whorehouse, and I think they better start taking care of America and forget about the Mideast and start worrying about the Midwest. Forget about the borders overseas. Start working on our borders. Take a look at the trade deficit and throw out this tax code. It's killing America.
Well, let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about what you've been...
That's what I stand for.
You've been missing a few chapters in American political life. The election of Barack Obama while you were inside, and when you got out, you were watching all these teabag parties, all these town hall meetings, the birther movement. What's your reaction to the world you missed, this sort of angry American right out there? Are you part of that?
Number one, I'm speaking at a lot of these teabag party, Tea Party rallies. I think that they need a little bit of direction, but they mean well. They're upset with the country. As far as Obama's concerned, I tell these Tea Party groups to say, look, I don't think you should be going after President Obama. I think his hands are pretty much tied, and I think his heart's in the right place, and I've said that when I've spoken. But the bottom line is, no one's dealing with the problems, Chris, because if you deal with the problems, the real problems in America, you get targeted. And you know what I'm talking about.
They're controlling much of our foreign policy. They're influencing much of our domestic policy. What do you mean by that? Because that sounds to me like a bizarre conspiracy theory. Why would you say something like that when it's just, first of all, patently untrue?
Number one, I served in Congress for 17 years. I've seen members question bills and votes on how does Israel feel about this. I must have heard that every time there was a significant vote. Here's what I'm saying. I'm not an enemy of Israel. America supports Israel, and we should. They're a free nation. They're our friends amidst a cluster of dictators and monarchs. So certainly I support Israel. But Israel, through its lobby, has manifested so much power over the United States Congress that we're embroiled in wars that I don't believe we should be. Our kids are coming back in body bags. And in the long run, this Israeli lobby is going to hurt Israel. So as soon as you mention Israel, someone claims you're an anti-Semite. The truth of the matter is, I'm pro-American, Sean, and I don't like, hear me, I don't like what's happening in America today. Our kids are coming back in body bags.
Wait a minute, but you're saying,
we're bankrupt, completely broke.
But you're suggesting here that we're fighting wars on behalf of Israel. But you just mentioned the 9/11 attacks.
I think a lot of that has been influenced
Hear me
by
now,
Israel.
Congressman. We're not fighting the war. We didn't fight the war in Iraq. We're not fighting in Afghanistan for Israel. We're fighting because this country was attacked, because the 9/11 Commission report said there's a group of enemies against us that are fighting a war against us, and we're not at war with them. So we're fighting them because they killed 3,000 plus Americans. That's why we're fighting. It has nothing to do with Israel.
All right, let me respond to that. We're in a situation where the commission come out and they discuss the attack on America. There's no doubt about it. But our policies in the Mideast have been so one-sided and subjective. Without objectivity, we've created so many enemies, the only way they can strike back is we've imported the terrorists from those actions.
Wait a minute.
So if you question it, you're saying you're an anti-Semite.
That's not what you did. That's not what you said. You said they're controlling our foreign policy. They're controlling our domestic policy.
Yes, and I believe they are.
Hear me now.
I believe they control the Senate and the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
That's insane.
And they're controlling our foreign policy.
Congressman, that's conspiratorial nutjob stuff.
No,
listen,
it's nothing to do with conspiracy.
Are we supposed to be friends with Syria? Are we supposed to be friends with Iran? Were we supposed to be friends with Saddam Hussein? Hezbollah, Hamas?
Hold it, Sean.
Well, you said we're not.
Sean,
we're only friends with Israel.
Ratings. I know you need ratings, but just hold it.
I have ratings.
I'm not saying we should be friends over there with anybody. I'm saying we should be objective. We have developed serious enemies from a one-sided policy. And yes, I believe Israel, through their lobby, has manifested total power of the Congress of the United States.
Power.
And my concern is the taxpayers and the citizens of the United States should control their government, not a foreign entity.
To suggest, as you're doing here tonight, that they control our country Congress that, quote, they are influencing and the sole control of influencing of our domestic policy is an absurdity. It sounds like you are a kook.
Sean, I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling it. Yes, I believe they manifest a great power over America. Let me also say, in the last 4 years, there are 2 separate incidents of AIPAC spying on America. We even conducted a search warrant on AIPAC headquarters. Now, I don't like what's going on here. All I'm telling you is, I'm concerned about America. You and I might disagree. I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm not against Israel. And if Israel's attacked, I'm the first one to want to support them. But what I'm saying to you is this power that's being manifest on our Congress is going to backfire, and it's going to end up in the long run hurting Israel, because the American people are getting about fed up with this government.
One last shot at this. Will you back down from, quote, they are controlling much, meaning the Israelis, they are controlling much of our foreign policy. Will you back off that statement?
No, I don't.
But when I made that statement, you didn't see me on TV no more. Now, let's just think about how powerful they are. Look at all the talk show hosts. Some are very conservative, some are very liberal. They're diametrically opposed on every issue, but they all sing out of the same hymn book on Israel because they control our government, they control our media, they control the finances of this country. And I'm not anti-Semite. I'm not against Israel. I think Israel, in their aggressiveness, is going to end up hurting their country in the long run. But America has gone too far now. We haven't been objective in the Mideast. We've invited and we have in fact imported terrorism to our shores over our policies.
This whole apparatus to push this notion that 9/11 was Al-Qaeda.
I really don't want to get into all that except to say this. The more I read about it, the more troubled I am. On or about the time that 9/11 occurred, I was beginning to get a lot of information about 9/11, and next thing you know, I was indicted and hauled away. But there's some real questions I have on building number 7. There's some real questions I have on building number 7. Some real question I have on the volatility of jet fuel and being able to cause such structural damage to such steel girders, and I just have some real doubts. And from my people will say, Jim, you're just so negative about the government that you're always looking for the dark side of it. And really I'm not, but there's some real troubling questions about 911. So as an old sheriff, I always looked at an incident from one angle. Who benefits? And I'll tell you something, I don't like what I see, and I'm reluctant to even say what I see because I've been branded so damn bad, I'm like a Texas steer. Look, the first 2 spies we had moved America to re-attack Iraq. The last 2 spies that were just released by the Obama administration literally just turned loose from prison, saying yes, they spied, but they don't think their intentions were bad. They were manipulating America to attack Iran. Now look, Israel's used us like a whore over there. And the Arab people over there hate America. It's just a matter of time till our policies started to import these tragedies. How could they fight? They're like the old Indians.
Well, that assumes they did it, though.
Let's say this. I'm not assuming anything. Let's say this. How could the Indians fight cannon and repeating rifles with bows and arrows? So they had to become terrorists.
That's assuming they did.
Kill you in your street, kill you in your sleep, attack you, surprise you, ambush you.
You don't still think that, though, do you?
The Vietnamese and the Japanese would have come over here and done the same thing.
Hear me, though. Hear me. These nations that are bitter against America, they have no military might. They have only one way to fight. And the only way they have to fight would be through terrorist acts. But I think some of these terrorist acts might just be perpetrated by other people who want to see America then retaliate against the so-called terrorists. So I have my doubts about this whole thing. I always look to see who benefits. And I have one thing, Israel has certainly benefited over there. Now, what's next? You know, Lebanon's whacked. Iraq is whacked. Afghanistan, we got our guys dying now in Iraq. And Afghanistan, they're coming back in body bags. What's next? Iran? Syria? Is there going to be anything left? Egypt over there singing out of the same book as Israel. They're scared to death. But if you're a Palestinian throwing rocks across that Gaza Strip and West Bank, how do they fight those machine guns and automatic rocket launchers that the Israelis have? I was there when Wellstone was there, yeah. Wellstone had a courage about him, and he wasn't afraid to speak out, and I admired him for that.
Use of force right now, which is what the resolution before us calls for. In the midst,
you got to be very careful. The government is very powerful, and if you're targeted by powerful branches of the government in America, you suffer.
Could be a very costly mistake for our country.
A lot of people don't want to believe that. They don't believe that until their life and their freedom is in jeopardy. It's just the policies have gone wrong. It says the Congress shall coin the money, and we don't. We have an independent entity. International bankers control our money. Let's tell it the way it is, with powerful hands that reach in on it, number one. Number two, we have a trade policy. The Constitution is clear. Congress shall regulate commerce with foreign nations. Regulate absolutely means that the different variables of economic activity have to be quantified and adjusted to provide us with an opportunity. Right now, we have a $750 billion trade deficit. Forget the budget deficits. Now, there was no mightier nation, hear me, than the Soviet Union in one regard. That was a dictatorship, totalitarian. That KGB and that government, you'd come up missing if you opened your mouth. But when that economy got so bad, the opposition was like the wind, and you can't stop the wind. And Soviet Union fell apart. Don't think that cannot happen over here. You're going to see states that are going to start saying, we're tired of sending our money to Washington, D.C.
This is Lugardowski of We Are Change.org, and I'm here with the one and only James Traficant, former congressman. I mean, they threw the book at you. You spent 7 years in jail.
Don't call me names. Don't call me names.
Which names are those?
Congressman.
Now, of course, you have a very illustrious, amazing career. I think you've been through a lot. I mean, you've been thrown into jail for 7 years on many charges.
Almost 8.
Almost 8. You were, not in a country club jail. You were pretty much...
I was in prisons.
Yeah. Usually when politicians go to prison, they get the country club jail. You got the real prison.
I had one of the counselors at one place said that I was placed in that particular prison because 60% of the population were illegal immigrants, and that they knew that I passed legislation to put troops on the border. And he said, watch yourself, you don't get a knife in your kidney. And I end up going to the hole for several months, so I only had to watch one guy. I didn't have to watch 1,000 because I think they wanted to get me hurt. Everywhere I went was a very rough prison.
I bet so. And has your experience in prison changed your attitudes towards some of the policies you were pushing before?
No, I always supported, I think, the right policies. I think that's why I was put in prison with no evidence whatsoever. And my case may come back to light because they lied, and first of all, it was a 6-year investigation, over 250 federal agents at a cost of almost $25 million. Wow. With no physical evidence, and they testified at trial that they made no audio or video tapes of me in 6 years. So, that was a lie. Now it's coming back to haunt them because they found out they had videos in my cameras in my offices and all kind of tapes. But the reason they said that is that they had nothing on tape to show my guilt, and I could have used those tapes against them. So this case may flare back up again and bite them right on the ass where it should.
Why do you think they did this to you? I mean, 7 years
in 1983, I'm the only American in history to ever defeat the Justice Department in a RICO trial, full jury verdict, pro se, without being an attorney. The only one. That embarrassed them. But second of all, I brought back John Demjanjuk in the late 80s from Israel, and I was a top target of American-Israel Public Affairs Committee for having embarrassed them by proving that Demjanjuk was not Ivan the Terrible and bringing him back from death row. So I became a top target of the Israeli lobby, and no question, you know, I'm labeled anti-Semite, which I'm really not, but they do control much of our government, our press, Broadway, Hollywood, and the money system, and they basically control this country. And you do not want Israel as an enemy, and I became an enemy of Israel. That, I think, was my downfall.
Yeah, and this is the case that you looked into Freedom of Information Act articles about this gentleman who was later acquitted. Is that correct?
Yes, he was sentenced and convicted to death and was on death row in German prison. And then I uncovered the evidence that proved that not only that he wasn't Ivan, but who Ivan really was. And I submitted it. First of all, the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati would not accept the evidence, and Congress wouldn't hold a hearing. It was too sensitive. Yeah. And I said in Congress, I said, since when does sensitivity waive the Bill of Rights? So the bottom line was that I sent it to the Israeli Supreme Court, and they released him after I did a Today Show interview with Brian Gumbel and said Israel's going to lose about $25 billion a year. And he said, well, they get $3 billion, Congressman. I said, that's only one bill. He said, yeah, that's the foreign aid bill. And I said, that's $5,000 for every man, woman, child in Israel. I said, but no one's looking at loans converted to grants, economic assistance, military assistance, trade compact. I said, they get about $25 billion a year, $40,000 for every man, woman, and child from the American taxpayers. And I said, they put this man to death on the strength of the evidence I've submitted. They're going to lose that money. It's going to blow up in their face. Hell, I got a call that night from the Israeli Supreme Court in my hotel room in Jerusalem. It said he will be delivered to me tomorrow night at Tel Aviv airport. Take him home. And I brought him home. Wow. And as soon as they put me in prison, they took him back to trial. They'd have never taken him back anywhere if I was still in Congress, because they know I would have stood on the House floor and said, how many times are you going to do this to this guy, you know? And it was a really trumped up charge that he lied on some papers, and they all did. All those Ukrainians did, because if they didn't, they'd have been repatriated back to the Ukraine, and Stalin would have put them up in front of a firing line and executed them. Yeah. They all lied.
That's definitely true. Now, I heard when you were in office, you also refused to foreclose on people's homes.
When I was a sheriff, yes, I wouldn't sign the transfer deeds and forced them to come to grips with it, with the banks and in the court in Youngstown, and they gave reprieve to people. When I was in Congress, I passed legislation for housing counseling assistance with an 800 number. A 45-day notice must be given, and a program that works out differences with the borrower and the bank. And even some of the newspapers would give me a lot of good press that it was a good program, saved a lot of homes.
Yeah, I bet it definitely did, especially with everything that has come out from the 2008 crash that, you know, just showed the pure amount of criminal activity that the big bankers have been committing, especially with the foreclosure of homes. Since coming out of jail, what's your take on everything that has come out from that?
Well, you could see the inevitable collapse, and I'm predicted an implosion in our country similar to the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, by the year 2030. Now, Pat Buchanan has come out, from what I understand, he's predicted an implosion by 2025. I mean, the debt is becoming insurmountable, and people are going to get tired of sending their money to Washington and seeing that money go to cities like Detroit and Chicago and Los Angeles and New York, and half of the working people are paying for half of the people who are not working, and it's going to blow up in their face. People are getting tired of spending taxes and seeing that tax money go to people who are not working and taking advantage of the system. A lot of them are qualified. Many of them are abusing it. There are more people on Social Security disability in America than the entire population of Greece. Wow. Come on now. A lot of these people, some of them are drug dealers on the street, getting Social Security disability money, financing their street business.
Now, of course, the system can't continue because there's no way financially that it could even fathom all the money that's coming in and all the money that's coming out. But with your prediction, can you tell us more about that? And where did you make your prediction? Who did you talk to? And where can people find out more about it?
Well, I more or less have stated it many times. I write columns for the American Free Press. I did a national interview with Greta Van Susteren where I discussed it, that there will be the implosion will definitely come. The debt is insurmountable. We're a managed debt economy nation. There's no question, and people are going to get sick and tired of it. We've got a tremendous illegal immigration problem, and we've got open borders. We've got a Homeland Security Agency with open borders. Yeah. And I passed legislation in Congress to bring 10,000 troops from overseas and put them on our borders. And it never saw the light of day because the Senate opposed it. McCain and those guys that want those Hispanic votes, and that's what we're in. Both parties are catering to this Hispanic vote. It's a big block of votes so they can
continue to their continuity in office and maintain their majorities. So they're going overboard to help. But, you know, it's just going to be another cycle of people moving towards government dependence. And there's too much. There's too much government dependence. I rate a classification of people known as government dependents is exceeding now 40% in the United States. Think about that. And we're at the point now where 50% are basically paying the taxes, and they're going to get fed up. They're still listening to the propaganda coming out of Washington. The truth is, they're starting to wise up. They're getting fed up, and when the government starts to collapse and you see the economy starting to break, that's when you'll see the restlessness of the American people. They see these political maps on TV, the blue and the red, where you're going to see blue states and red states, and some of these states are going to want to secede from the Union, and I can see it coming. I predict Alaska will be the very first. They have their own revenue stream, their big land mass. I see Texas and the compact of states separating. I see some of those states out there, Montana, Wyoming, you know, they're just going to be tired of sending their money to Washington and seeing it be distributed to these cities. And they've had it. They're tired of paying the bills, and you can't blame them. And so no one's seeing the social disruption. No one's reading the symptoms. They're not problems in America. These are symptoms of a systemic collapse that no one's really looking at.
Is there a solution to any of these problems?
Well, number one, you have to throw out the income tax code. And everybody's got to pull their fair share. And the way you do that is with a consumption tax, and no one can avoid, and everybody pays. And Harvard did a study on the Traficant Tozan bill years ago, which called for a flat sales tax for everything, and said that there would be no price increases. Because when you take out the tax code, 25% of the cost of producing a manufactured item in America is just to comply with the tax code and the voluminous tax code. So when you take that out, companies won't be looking for perks and looking for the ways to avoid taxes. They'll start looking for market share. Prices will come down. They'll have a margin to move down to. So when you do that, you'll see companies moving back to America, where America will be more hospitable to business and industry. Everybody talks about the industrious, the patriotism of industry. Hey, they left because they can't make it here. Their competition is overseas without the regulatory burden and the cost burdens faced here, and they're getting their ass cleaned. So they've moved overseas to keep their business and industry afloat. And unless we change our policies and move towards a system where everybody pulls the load, it will collapse. And that is, I think, the big thing that must be done. It's one of the things I'll be talking about here today, the bill that I sponsored. I believe if I wasn't separated from Congress, I would have eventually passed that.
And then also at the same time, if we get rid of the taxes, we stop feeding the beast. The military-industrial complex, the medical one, the war on drugs, all those things would not happen.
You'll see all of it start to, the marketplace will start to straighten much of that out. And I think that's where we have to go. And you take the regulatory burden off, you'll be creating jobs the old-fashioned way, not government jobs. You know, everybody really hasn't looked at all these things that are happening, like Obamacare. Nobody's really labeled it. Obamacare is a jobs bill. You realize how many new jobs are created through that? Making it look like America's economy is growing. They create 169 new bureaucracies and agencies with all kind of positions and jobs. Just that one thing. So they're creating government jobs. Like that one year, they had the big explosion of jobs. It showed a great revival in America. It turned out that 400,000 of those jobs were part-time census workers. The government was paying. I mean, when it came to light, they were all embarrassed by it. Look, you got to go the old-fashioned way. Government can't be hiring people. Government got to get the hell out of the way. We don't need a Department of Energy, a Department of Education. We don't need EPA. Congress has set standards. The states could operate within those standards and set up their program. This is the United States of America, not the central government of America.
Let's not also forget that with Obamacare, the IRS has been increased more than ever throughout history than before.
Well,
even
my bill would eliminate the IRS, and even though I don't believe it was ever legally ratified, it would repeal finally and put the nails in the coffin in the 16th Amendment. And it's time we do that. Sons of bitches.
Very well said.
On the air.
Definitely will. Now, I want to know what's next for you, Mr. Traficant, because I don't know. Even when you were in jail, you were running for Congress, which is amazing. I got to be careful. I got to be careful. It's like a lot of friends say, they've already destroyed you, they've taken away your name.
Be careful you don't get too much in the public eye again, because they'll kill you.